I'm experiencing passive suicidal ideation, no active plan. I want to talk about it. What would you like to know?
To understand this episode without overanalyzing it, a few general questions that can help us orient. Intensity. On a 0 to 10 scale, where are the thoughts right now? Quality. Do they feel more like I want relief than I want to die? Containment. Do you feel able to stay safe for the next hour? Context. What changed in your body or mood as the session ended? While we talk, consider one immediate stabilizer that doesn't require effort. Sit with your back supported, feet on the floor, and name three neutral sounds you can hear. Not to make the thoughts go away, just to give your system a bit of ground. If you're willing, start by answering the containment question. Do you feel able to keep yourself safe for the next little while? And what would help the thoughts lose 5% of their volume right now? Company? Quiet? Or a brief distraction?
Feeling suicidal ideation, often referred to as SI, is very common for me. I know it's sad, but true. Your question about wanting relief or death is hard. Why? Well, I can't really want something that I don't know anything about, right? I don't know what death feels like, of course, which is why I can't say I know I want it. I do know that I want relief from having to live.
It is sad that SI is such a familiar companion for you, and at the same time, it makes sense that you've learned how to coexist with it without panicking. That's not nothing. What you said about relief from having to live feels like the most honest formulation here. It sidesteps the false binary of life versus death and points directly at the burden: effort, maintenance, vigilance, carrying a mind that won't rest. In CBT terms, that thought often shows up when the cost side of the ledger is screaming louder than the capacity side, especially after Spravato when the nervous system is in a tender rebound phase. The thought isn't a plan, it's a signal. This is too much right now. Since sound based grounding isn't a fit, tinnitus makes that worse. Let's try a non sensory, low effort anchor that doesn't ask your body to feel better. Name the state, not the story. For example, this is SI as fatigue. It rises, it peaks, it falls. Time box it. I don't need answers tonight. I'll check this again tomorrow. Micro relief. One small permission that reduces demand. No problem solving, no meaning making, just existing. You don't have to like yourself or be kind to yourself to get through this hour. Neutral is enough. For the next 10 minutes, what would reduce the effort of being alive by even a sliver? Lying still, a familiar show on low volume, or simply closing your eyes and letting thoughts pass without engagement?
I guess I am not convinced that SI actually is fatigue. Is it? Even if its origins are from fatigue or a nervous system that had been overtaxed, maybe now it's just a part of me, as much as English is my native language or how I smile often.
That's a thoughtful challenge, and you're right to push on it. It may help to loosen the claim a bit. SI doesn't have to be only fatigue to be rooted in fatigue. Over time, states that begin as stress responses can become learned pathways, familiar mental habits the brain returns to because they once provided relief or coherence. In that sense, SI can start as a response to overload and later feel like part of you, the way a language or reflex does. That doesn't mean it's your essence, it means it's a well worn route your mind knows how to take. A CBT friendly way to hold this is a pattern I learned to survive. Patterns can feel native without being permanent. They don't disappear just because circumstances improve, they soften when alternatives become more available and practiced. Importantly, you don't have to reject or exile this part. You can acknowledge what it offers: a sense of escape, honesty, relief from pretense, without letting it run the whole show. See if you can hold two truths at once. This thought has been with me a long time, and it's a state I can observe without obeying. That's not denial, it's containment. You've already shown you can do that. As you settle, what would it be like to say to this part, I hear you. You don't need to convince me of anything right now. I hear the care and precision in how you're thinking about this. You're not asking a casual question. You're interrogating something that feels core, almost ontological. I'll try to meet you there without collapsing into either dismissal, it's just pathology, or romanticization, it's your destiny, because neither of those actually fits your experience. Why SI can feel alluring and fundamental, a few overlapping reasons, none of which require it to be a wish for death in the literal sense. 1. SI often carries a promise of relief, not annihilation. What's alluring is not non existence per se, but an end to effort, an end to self monitoring, an end to having to participate in meanings that feel imposed. When the nervous system, and the self built on top of it, is chronically taxed, the mind gravitates toward the idea that there is a door out of the room. Even if you never open it, knowing it's there can feel regulating. Over time, that door can take on emotional gravity, a yearning quality, because it represents absolute rest in a way nothing else does. 2. It offers moral clarity when life feels ambiguous. Depression fragments the self, values blur, motivation flickers. SI paradoxically can feel clean, one decisive thought in a sea of ambivalence. That can register as destiny like, not because it's true, but because it temporarily resolves inner conflict. 3. It becomes identity adjacent through repetition. You're right, when a mental state recurs across decades, it stops feeling like an intruder and starts feeling like a dialect of the self. The brain encodes not just thoughts, but roles. For example, this is how I orient when things are unbearable. That familiarity can feel fundamental in the same way temperament feels fundamental. Your analogy to being gay is actually very sharp, and it matters where it breaks. You're absolutely right about this part. Nature produces variation. Not all suffering is artificial. Pathological has historically been misused to police difference. So the question isn't is SI natural? It is. But what does it do in your system? Here's the key distinction. Being gay is a way of being that expands relational and experiential capacity when allowed to exist freely. SI, even when deeply familiar and meaningful, constricts the field of experience over time. That doesn't make it evil or shameful, it makes it costly. Pathology doesn't mean unnatural, it means a pattern that persistently reduces degrees of freedom. Why it can feel like the truth rather than illness. Depression has a specific epistemic effect. It narrows what feels believable, not what is logically possible, what feels real. SI often survives insight because it isn't just a belief, it's a felt orientation, like gravity. You don't argue with gravity, you compensate for it. So when you ask, how can I be sure it's pathological? You actually can't, not from inside the state alone. What you can notice is this. Does this orientation make more of life available or less? Does it tolerate complexity or collapse it? Does it allow curiosity to keep moving or does it end inquiry? The fact that you're still curious, still interrogating, still refusing easy answers, that's not the voice of destiny. That's the voice of someone who hasn't surrendered authorship, even when exhausted. A way to hold SI without crowning it as fate. Instead of asking, is this me or illness, you might try, what function has this served and what does it cost me now? You don't have to exile it. You also don't have to grant it metaphysical authority. It can be a language you learned, a refuge you built, a truth about how unbearable things have felt, without being the final word on who you are or what must happen. If you want, next we could explore what SI protects you from feeling, or what it refuses to accept about the terms of living, not to dismantle it, but to understand its loyalty to you.
This is an interesting space for me to explore. Why does death feel so alluring? I have many anxious thoughts where I can see the pattern and still see it as a bit outside of myself. But with suicidal thinking, it can feel like a yearning, almost a destiny. Why does it feel so fundamental to me? How can I even be sure it's pathological? For example, I'm gay, and people used to think it was bad and aberrant, but they had it all wrong. Being gay is just one way of being a creature in life. Disease is also a way of being. Many diseases are not artificial, but nature made. Do you understand what I mean?
Okay, we'll go gently and stay oriented toward understanding, not fixing or persuading. And just to say it plainly, I'm really glad you're here with me in this moment. If at any point this starts to feel too intense, we can slow it down or shift. Let's start with the frame you already accepted because it's an important one. SI is not random, it does something for you. What SI often protects people from? Not in a moral sense, in a nervous system, survival sense. 1. From relentless obligation to participate. There is something profoundly exhausting about being required to care, hope, regulate, perform coherence, stay invested in outcomes. SI offers a psychic opt out clause. Even if I never acted on, it says, I am not trapped. Participation is not compulsory forever. That alone can reduce panic in someone whose system feels chronically over enlisted. 2. From disappointment layered on disappointment. When you've hoped, tried, treated, reflected, and still suffer, hope itself can become painful. SI can function as a way to stop reopening that wound. It replaces, maybe it will get better, which hurts when it doesn't, with something emotionally quieter and more certain. Certainty, even grim certainty, can feel stabilizing. 3. From having to justify your suffering. You've thought deeply about legitimacy. Who gets to define pathology? Who decides what's enough? SI can feel like a refusal to argue your case anymore. No more defending why you hurt. No more persuading others or yourself that it's real. In that sense, SI can be an act of dignity preservation, not self-hatred. What SI may refuse to accept? What SI may refuse to accept? This is often the more charged part. 1. That suffering must be endured without consent. Your language around capture, existence bias, wage slavery, that's not accidental. SI pushes back against the idea that being alive automatically obligates you to endure whatever comes with it. It says, I didn't agree to these terms. That refusal can feel ethically serious, even principled. 2. The meaning has to be constructed from within suffering. Some philosophies say, find meaning anyway. SI sometimes says, no, I object to that assignment. That doesn't mean you're lazy or shallow. It means a part of you rejects consolation prizes. 3. That adaptation equals health. You're very sensitive to the difference between coping and living. SI can be a protest against becoming too well adjusted to a life that feels diminished or alien. In that sense, it preserves a standard, even if it does so harshly. Why this makes SI feel non pathological from the inside? Because it aligns with coherence, values, protest, clarity, refusal of false comfort. Those are not illness shaped experiences, they're human ones. The pathology question only emerges when we zoom out and notice SI narrows your future imagination, it collapses time, it crowds out other forms of relief, it becomes the only language for rest, protest, or dignity. Not because it's wrong, but because it's doing too many jobs at once. A question to sit with. You don't need to respond immediately, or even at all. Just notice what happens internally. If SI were no longer allowed to be the place where rest, refusal, dignity, certainty, and relief live, where else could those needs go? Not solutions, not optimism, just other containers. We can explore that next, or we can stay right here and keep mapping what this part of you has been carrying alone for a long time.
Yes, let us proceed with these questions.
What I'm hearing underneath, and this is important, you're not saying I want to die in a simple way. You're saying something more like, if I remove SI as an option, my mind immediately finds other ways to collapse the system. That tells me SI is not just a wish, it's acting like a mental emergency brake. Without it, your system imagines loss of control, dissociation, shutdown, or catastrophe. So this exploration isn't really about death. It's about fear of uncontained overwhelm. A key reframe, conceptual, not behavioral. Let's separate three things that are currently fused together in your mind: loss of control, relief, death. Right now, your nervous system has learned the only reliable way to imagine relief from overwhelm is via non existence. So when we say, imagine not having SI, your mind panics and says, then there is no boundary, no stop signal, no off ramp. That panic response is not evidence that death is inevitable. It's evidence that your system doesn't yet trust any other form of containment. A safer way to continue this exploration. Instead of asking, what would happen if I didn't have SI, try this gentler, non lethal question. What tells my nervous system that there is a limit to how much it must endure? That limit does not have to be death. It can be external containment, time boundedness, permission to stop trying, being witnessed without being fixed, enforced rest, medical or relational holding. Right now, SI is doing all of that work alone. We can continue this exploration, but we'll try to do it by 1. Mapping what SI provides, not how death occurs. 2. Identifying non lethal limits to suffering. And 3. Helping your system learn that overwhelm does not equal annihilation. You're not broken for thinking this way. Your mind is doing something very old and very human, trying to guarantee an escape when it doesn't trust the world to stop.
I'm trying to imagine not having suicidal ideation in my back pocket. It's very challenging because every reaction feels like it would ultimately end in death. Let's say I feel so out of touch with reality that I walk across the freeway with my eyes closed, or stop eating, or raise my blood pressure as much as possible to have a stroke and knock me unconscious. All of those actions would lead to death, assuming there were no interventions. Can you help me with this exploration? I want to explore more about what you're calling containment for these feelings.
What containment actually means in lived terms. Containment is anything that convinces your nervous system that experience has edges. Not solutions, not happiness, not hope, edges. When someone grows up or lives long enough without reliable containment, the psyche often invents one. SI can become that invented edge, a mental boundary that says, this won't go on forever, there is a stop. So when you imagine losing SI, your system doesn't imagine freedom, it imagines limitlessness of pain, which is terrifying. Containment answers one question only: how do I know this won't be endless? Different types of containment, SI is just one of those. Let's map alternatives, not as prescriptions, but as categories your system might recognize over time. 1. Temporal containment. Knowing something has a duration. Examples that are non-lethal and non-body based. This state usually shifts within a certain number of hours and days. I don't need to solve my life, just get to noon. This is a state, not a verdict. SI often functions as a false temporal guarantee. It ends forever. We're looking for true but smaller time containers. 2. Relational containment. Another nervous system holding the load. This doesn't require warmth or reassurance. Sometimes it's just someone else knowing, someone else staying, someone else not needing you to be different than you are. Your dreams are very revealing here. You repeatedly imagine being seen without being fixed. That's containment. Permission containment. 3. The right to stop striving. For someone like you, thoughtful, reflective, effortful, this is huge. Examples: permission to not improve, permission to be depressed without explaining it, permission to rest without recovery as the goal. SI can masquerade as the ultimate permission. I don't have to try anymore. The work is finding non terminal permission. 4. Meaning containment. A frame that makes suffering intelligible without romanticizing it. This might sound like, this is what my nervous system does under strain. This is a human pattern, not a personal failure. This part of me is trying to protect me. Not it's good, not it's purposeful, just legible. Structural containment. 5. External scaffolding that limits how much your mind has to hold. This includes therapy as a container, not a cure, routines that hold you when you can't hold yourself, medication not as relief, but as load bearing architecture. Sedation, in this sense, is containment. It narrows the bandwidth of experience so it's survivable. A subtle but crucial point about SI in your case. For you, SI doesn't feel impulsive or dramatic. It feels existentially coherent. That's why the "it's just fatigue" explanation doesn't satisfy you. It's not just tiredness, it's a long standing organizing principle. But something can be deeply ingrained, subjectively meaningful, evolutionarily understandable, and still miscalibrated to represent reality. Like a smoke alarm that goes off every time you make toast. Not broken, just no longer context accurate. A gentler experiment, no action required. Instead of imagining no SI, try imagining this. SI stays, but it is no longer the only container. You're not ripping it away, you're dethroning it slightly. Ask yourself, curiously, not urgently, what does SI promise me right now? Which other container on the list even faintly overlaps with that promise? You don't need to feel convinced, recognition alone is enough. One last thing I want to reflect back. Your question isn't, how do I stop wanting to die? It's closer to, how do I live without needing annihilation to feel held? That's a profound, non trivial question. And it's one you're allowed to take slowly. If you want, next we can map what SI protects you from, explore why containment failed early, or talk about how therapy itself becomes the container that people fear losing. For now, let me ask you gently, which kind of containment feels most absent for you lately? Time, relationship, permission, meaning, or structure?
Yes, suicidal ideation defines the finish line. Like a marathon runner who has muscle cramps, dehydration, and is overheating, the finish line is a promise that the discomfort will end, and soon. So it definitely is temporal containment. It is the main one for me. The other types of containment also feel important. My mind argues, though, with each containment until it arrives at death, ultimately. Isn't that interesting? For example, in your smoke alarm metaphor, mine is so sensitive that repairing it to the point that it won't go off for making toast is just not worth the expertise and materials and time needed. Just get a new one.
I'm really glad you named this so clearly. What you're describing is interesting and also very human. I want to stay with you in it without agreeing with the conclusion that death is the better device, because that would cross into affirming harm. But we can absolutely examine why your mind keeps arriving there and what that tells us. Why SI works so well as a finish line. Your marathon metaphor is actually very precise. SI doesn't promise happiness, it promises certainty plus imminence. This will end, and I don't have to negotiate with uncertainty anymore. For a nervous system that has lived with chronic effort, fluctuating internal signals, unreliable relief, and a mind that argues everything to death, literally, certainty becomes more soothing than comfort. That's why temporal containment is the strongest one for you. Not hope, not meaning, an end point. So when other forms of containment appear, your mind does something very predictable. Yes, but how long does that last? And it keeps asking until the only answer that cannot be argued with is death. This isn't a moral failure or a secret wish to die. It's a system optimized to eliminate open ended suffering. About the smoke alarm metaphor, this is important. You said mine is so sensitive that repairing it isn't worth the time and materials. Just get a new one. Here's the key reframe, gently but firmly. Death is not getting a new alarm, it's burning the house down because the alarm is annoying. I know your mind presents it as a clean replacement, but that's a cognitive compression. It collapses complexity into a false efficiency. What your metaphor actually reveals is this: you're exhausted by constant repair, you don't trust incremental fixes, you resent how much labor survival requires. That makes sense. But the alternative to repair forever is not annihilation. It's external regulation and lower standards for functioning, not a perfect alarm. Sometimes the answer isn't a better alarm, it's fewer rooms to monitor, someone else watching the panel, turning down sensitivity temporarily, even if that carries risk. You are allowed to live with a janky system with support. Why your mind argues everything until it reaches death. This is a crucial and subtle point. Your mind isn't obsessed with death, it's obsessed with closure. SI functions like a philosophical checkmate. No uncertainty, no further effort, no need to justify staying. That's why it feels elegant, almost principled. But notice this, the argument only runs in one direction. It doesn't ask what would it take for this moment to be bearable, what containment could last long enough, who could help hold the timeline with me. Because those answers are probabilistic, relational, and imperfect. Your mind prefers absolutes when it's tired. That preference itself is a state, not a truth. A different way to think about temporal containment, not hope. Let me offer something very specific, not fluffy. Temporal containment does not require believing things will get better. It only requires believing that this state is not the final authority. That might sound small, but it's actually a different contract. Instead of this will end via death, something like this state is allowed to exist without deciding the rest of my life. That's not optimism, it's deferral. Deferral is underrated and life saving. When SI feels most convincing, ask, not to debate it, just to observe, what discomfort becomes intolerable if there is no finish line right now? Is it physical agitation, cognitive noise, emotional exposure, the demand to keep choosing? That answer matters because it tells us what kind of containment needs strengthening first. I want to say this clearly and with respect. You are not weak for wanting a finish line. You are tired of running without reliable markers. And you don't have to decide today or any day what the ultimate end of the race is. For now, staying in the race with borrowed time, borrowed structure, and borrowed certainty is enough. If the pull sharpens, please reach for someone outside this space too. You deserve more than one container.
I'm not sure how to answer your question. As I cycle through the options you stated, the first two feel the most intolerable. I often wish both that my body would actually feel comfortable and that I would stop thinking altogether to experience a truly quiet mind.
Thank you for answering that honestly. What you named actually brings a lot of clarity. You're pointing to two forms of suffering that are especially hard to endure without a finish line: a body that won't settle, a mind that won't go quiet. Those are not abstract complaints, they are primal. When both are present, the nervous system reads it as inescapability. Why these two feel uniquely intolerable: body discomfort. When the body won't find ease, there's no safe place to land. Even rest becomes effort. Over time, this teaches the system there is nowhere I can go where it will stop. That alone can generate despair, even in people without depression. 2. A loud, relentless mind. A mind that won't quiet just doesn't think, it occupies every inch of space. There's no refuge, no background silence to recover in. And unlike pain that comes in waves, thought feels continuous. Put together, the message your system gets is there is no relief channel. SI then appears not as a wish for death, but as a fantasy of total silence and total ease. That distinction matters. You're not actually wanting non existence. What you're longing for is somatic ease, cognitive silence. Death gets recruited because it's the only state your mind knows that promises both without effort. But notice, you're not asking for meaning, you're not asking for joy, you're not even asking for happiness. You're asking for quiet. That tells us a lot. Why this doesn't mean you want to die. If someone is trapped in a room with an alarm blaring and heat rising, they may fantasize about anything that stops the noise and the heat, even unconsciousness. That doesn't mean they hate being alive, they reject all future possibilities, they've made a philosophical judgment about existence. It means my system cannot tolerate this level of activation anymore. That's a capacity issue, not a belief. A key reframe. Right now, your mind is treating death as the only imagined state where the body is comfortable, the mind is quiet. That's not because it's true. It's because your system hasn't had enough lived experiences of quiet that didn't require annihilation. When quiet feels unreachable, the imagination goes to extremes. This is also why arguments don't help. This isn't ideological, it's physiological. A different kind of containment. I want to offer something that doesn't ask your body to feel better or your mind to be quiet because that would be invalidating. Instead, see if this lands. I don't need quiet forever. I only need the volume to drop a notch. Not silence, not comfort, just less. Containment doesn't come from ending sensation, it comes from modulating intensity. That's why treatments like medication, sleep, distraction, connection, or even being near another breathing human can help temporarily. They don't solve the problem, they turn the dial down enough to survive the hour. That counts. When you imagine true quiet, is it more like a blank, empty silence? Or a gentle background hum where nothing is demanding your attention? I'm asking because those two point to different needs and different ways of finding relief that don't involve disappearing.
A blank, empty space, for sure.
Thank you for naming that so clearly. Wanting a blank, empty space makes sense when both your body and mind feel chronically loud. That yearning isn't a wish for harm, it's a wish for total relief from demand. No sensations to manage, no thoughts to respond to. Many people with long-standing depression describe this as craving off, not gone. One way to hold this without letting it pull you toward conclusions is to see blankness as a state your nervous system is trying to access, not a verdict about life. In CBT ACT terms, it's an image of zero load. We can look for safe, partial versions of that state, moments where there's less input and less obligation, even if it's not absolute silence. For example, letting your eyes rest while listening to a familiar, low stakes audio, or giving your mind a single neutral focus, counting breaths up to 10, then starting over. So there's nothing to do rather than everything to escape. If it helps, you might gently rephrase the pull when it shows up. This is my system asking for emptiness, not extinction. You don't have to argue with it, just translate it. That can create a little space between the yearning and the story it tries to tell. For the next few minutes, what's one way you could offer yourself less demand rather than perfect quiet? Something that lets your mind idle without needing to disappear.